The committee will come to order. Today's hearing is entitled D.C. Navy Yard Shooting, Fixing the Security Clearance Process. And I will now recognize myself. The Oversight Committee exists to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. It is our job to work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. This is our mission. What am I doing with this? Yeah. Now recognize myself. Michael Arnold, Kathy Garrity, John Roger Johnson, Arthur Daniels, Richard Michael Riggle, Martin Bodrog, Viju Pandant, Kenneth Bernard Proctor, Mary Frances Knight, Gerald Reed, Sylvia Frazier, Frank Kohler. Typically, these 12 public servants who lost their life on September 16, 2013, when a deranged gunman entered Building 197, the headquarters of the Navy Sea Systems Command at the Washington Navy Yard, would not be read in the halls of Congress. But I think today, as we look into why we are here, we are not here to embarrass the companies. We are not here to embarrass the Office of Personnel Management. But we are here to recognize that a horrendous act of violence occurred, one in which we believe, in all likelihood, best practices in employment could have prevented this. But more than that, this was a deranged individual who had a security clearance. So more than simply the question of whether or not he should have been employed or should have been in therapy or should have been incarcerated, we are asking the question of, when we go beyond simply an employment look, but in fact a secured employment look, how could we miss someone who had repeatedly used a weapon in a deranged way? Flattening tires with a gun, shooting holes in the roof of his own house simply because someone was making too much noise. These are not the acts that an employer would accept and allow somebody to have access to a building and access to a building in which they committed unspeakable acts. This hearing will not deal entirely with management practices in hiring of Federal employees. It will primarily deal with the 4.9 million Americans holding security clearances, because the standard for security clearances should be higher than those for employees. But as a former employer, I must tell you, I am disappointed that the system is not in place to catch every person of this type of history, no matter whether they had a security clearance or not. This committee has been conducting a bipartisan investigation of the facts and circumstances surrounding this incident. My partner, Mr. Cummings, and the entire committee staff on both sides have in fact seen glaring mistakes in the existing Federal security clearance process as a whole. Over the course of our 4-month investigation, these questions have come up. Why did the Federal Government grant security clearance to a man with a known violent criminal past, one he attempted to cover up? Why did the Federal Government revoke that clearance when why didn't the Federal Government revoke that clearance when his unstable mental condition raised red flags? we, again, are not here to point fingers specifically at this, but rather those 12 names I mentioned are names that should not have died in vain without real change. I want to thank the Ranking Member for being my partner in this. I want to make it very clear that this is not a problem created by this administration. This is a problem of bureaucracy, longstanding, but no longer can we stand for it. We owe that much to the families of each of the victims. And with that, I now recognize Mr. Cummings for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. There is no doubt that we need to conduct a thorough, and when I say thorough, I mean thorough, investigation to determine how Aaron Alexis was able to obtain and keep a security clearance given his troubling background. We owe this to the families of the 12 people he killed and the others he injured, as well as all Americans who rely on the background check system to protect our national security. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you and your staff for a bipartisan approach on this investigation. Our work has the potential, and I do say the potential, to stand as an important part of this committee's legacy if we follow through on these efforts. Here's what we know so far. First, Alexis obtained a security clearance from the Navy in 2008, and his background investigation was conducted by U.S. Investigation Services, USIS. USIS is the single biggest contractor that performs background investigations for the Office of Personnel Management, completing more than the government or any other contractor. 4 years before Alexis got his clearance, he was arrested in Seattle for shooting out the tires of someone's car. USIS did not obtain a copy of that 2004 report, and OPM did not require one because the City of Seattle refused to cooperate with similar requests in the past. Something wrong with that picture. Instead, USIS obtained a summary that omitted references to the weapon and said only that Alexis was charged with malicious mischief. If USIS and the government had obtained a copy of that arrest report, perhaps Alexis's clearance would have been denied. Under its contract, USIS also was required to conduct a quality review of its background investigation of Alexis. However, nobody has confirmed that USIS did that quality review. USIS has not confirmed it, nor has OPM, and interesting, nor has the Inspector General. In 2011, a longtime USIS employee, its Director of Fieldwork Services, accused USIS of a massive conspiracy to bilk the United States taxpayers. Let that sink in. Although USIS was required to conduct quality reviews of all of its background investigations, this official reported that USIS was, quote, dumping, in the quote, unfinished cases and billing OPM for work anyway. Inexplicably, USIS also had a separate contract with OPM to conduct additional quality reviews on behalf of the agency. In other words, USIS was checking its own work. In January, the committee conducted a transcribed interview with Merton Miller, OPM's Associate Director of Federal Investigative Services. He accused USIS of using information obtained through this second contract to evade detection of its fraud under the first. He said this, and I quote, "They circumvented OPM's oversight of their performance, of their quality review. I'm not splitting hairs, but they knew how we were auditing, end of quote. He continued, and I quote, "They knew what kinds of reports we generated to oversee that they were actually performing the activity. So they circumvented our oversight process and they falsified records to help do that," end of quote. The Department of Justice has now determined that these allegations have merit and filed a false claims suit seeking more than $1 billion from USIS, claiming that the company charged taxpayers for work it never performed on, ladies and gentlemen, listen to this, on 665,000 background investigations from 2008 to 2012. We're better than that. The Department stated, and I quote, "USIS management devised and executed a scheme to deliberately circumvent contractually required quality reviews of completed background investigations in order to increase the company's revenues and profits," end of quote. In 2007, USIS was purchased by a private equity firm known as Providence Equity Partners. The committee's investigation revealed that directly after the acquisition, USIS adopted aggressive new financial incentives to accelerate its work. During this period, USIS executives received huge bonuses, including more than $1 million for the company's CEO, Bill Mixon, and about $470,000 for the company's chief financial officer. As I close, the Justice Department alleges that both officials were, and I quote, "fully aware of and in fact directed the dumping practices," end of quote. USIS also received millions of dollars in bonus payments from OPM, and I'd like to know why that is, for its seemingly incredible progress, including $2.4 million in bonuses in 2008, $3.5 million in bonuses in 2009, and $5.8 million in bonuses in 2010. That's taxpayer dollars. In the wake of this scandal, the company's CEO, CFO, and nearly 24 other officials have resigned, been terminated, or left the company. In fact, just yesterday, USIS informed us that the president of its Investigation Services Division has also now resigned. These revelations cry out for an investigation, but to date the committee has not conducted a single transcribed interview of any USIS employee. Chairman, I know you wanted to focus first on OPM's oversight, and I do too. But given what we have now uncovered, these serious allegations must be investigated. While I have no objection to Mr. Phillips being here today, he was hired only last year and has no firsthand knowledge of these allegations. We should investigate, as we should in any case like this, how bonuses and incentives were paid to USIS executives. And by the way, I want to know that from OPM, as well as the roles played by Providence Equity Partners and our integrity, the holding company formed to house USIS. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that your staff provided us with a draft of your report last week, but I regret that you issued it yesterday without including most of the information about USIS that we asked to be included. For these reasons, I am issuing my own staff report today that provides this information, and I ask that it may be a part of the record.
Without objection, the minority comments, in addition to the majority staff report, will be joined, and I share with the gentleman that, assuming the Department of Justice will concur, that we will be doing further transcribed interviews.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All members may have 7 days to submit opening statements. We now welcome our panel of witnesses. Mr. Sterling Phillips is the CEO of U.S. Investigative Services, LLC. We are joined by the Honorable Catherine Archuleta, who is the newly named Director of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, or OPM. Mr. Stephen Lewis is the Deputy Director of Personnel Industrial and Physical Security Policy at the Department of Defense. The Honorable Patrick McFarland is the Inspector General of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, again, OPM. And Ms. Susan Orlowski, better than most of my mistakes, is the Vice President of Contracts and Compliance at Keypoint Government Solutions. And we are joined by Mr. Michael Rhodes, who is the Executive Vice President, Mission Systems and Services Business Group for CACI International, Inc. Pursuant to the rules, I would ask that you all please rise and take the oath. And raise your right hands, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for this large panel, I would ask that you all observe strictly the 5-minute clock. Your entire opening statements are in the record, so your comments may be completely in addition to that if you would like. And with that, we first recognize the gentlelady, OPM Director Catherine Archuleta.
Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today regarding the role of U.S. Office of Personnel Management in the Federal Security Clearance process. I appreciate the committee's oversight of this matter, and I want you to know how deeply committed I am to ensuring the integrity and the efficacy of our programs and our products. Understandably, this issue has come under greater scrutiny since the tragedy at the Washington Navy Yard, which took the lives of 12 people and injured 8 more. I want to express my deepest sympathies and condolences to those who lost loved ones in the Navy Yard tragedy. I can only imagine the anguish felt by the families of those affected by this senseless attack, and those individuals are in my thoughts and in my prayers as they move forward in light of this awful event. OPM plays a critical role in protecting our national security. We conduct more than 2 million investigative actions each year for over 100 Federal agencies. This represents 95% of all background investigations. Each agency is responsible for determining whether an individual requires clearance and adjudicating eligibility for access to classified information. OPM provides the background information for many agencies to make an informed decision about security clearances. Since arriving at OPM 3 months ago, I have made this issue a top priority. Of central importance to me are addressing legitimate questions about the background investigation process and working with DOJ and OPM's Office of Inspector General to investigate the outrageous allegations of fraud by one of our contractors. Let me be clear. OPM does not tolerate and has never tolerated fraud in any form. It is wholly inconsistent with OPM's core values and does not reflect the integrity and the dedication of hard-working OPM employees. When any allegation of fraud is brought to OPM's attention, OPM works closely with DOJ and OPM's OIG to bring those involved to justice. The case against USIS, outlined in the complaint filed by DOJ, raises grave concerns of an egregious violation of the public trust. Since we learned about these issues, OPM has taken steps to improve the oversight of our contracts, remove contractor employees from the contract, and strengthen our overall operations. It is imperative that we have a process in place that meets the highest standards of quality, efficiency, timeliness, and integrity. The American public expects no less, and so do I. At the President's direction and under the leadership of the Director of OPM has been working with its colleagues on the Sustainability and Security Performance Accountability Council to review the federal security clearance and suitability processes. The background investigation program is a complex undertaking, and OPM is vigilant in ensuring the highest standards of quality. Mr. Chairman, I have made this issue one of my top priorities. Starting last week, I directed that the quality review process conducted by OPM be fully federalized. We no longer have contractors participating in our ongoing final federally controlled quality process. Having Federal employees now perform this function acts as an internal quality control, preventing any contractor from performing the final quality of review of its own work. OPM remains committed to developing effective long-term policies and processes for ensuring high-quality review standards. As the largest provider of investigative products, OPM recognizes that in a rapidly changing world, the background investigation program and the security clearance process in particular must keep up with the times while continuing to meet existing demands. We continue to work with ODNI as the security executive agent and our other reform partners to ensure that we have processes in place that meet the high expectations set by Congress, our interagency partners, and most importantly, the American public. As the new director of OPM, I look forward to working with this committee to ensure the highest quality of background investigations through strong leadership, accountability, and forward thinking. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you. At this time, I ask unanimous consent that the cases filed in the Alabama court entitled Blake Percival versus U.S. Investigation Services, Inc., and the second one entitled United States of America et re Blake Percival versus U.S. Services be placed in the record. Without objection, so ordered. We now go to Mr. Stephen Lewis.
Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and distinguished members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to address the practices and the procedures in the Department of Defense regarding the personnel security clearance process. I am here today on behalf of Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence Michael Vickers, who serves as the Principal Staff Assistant to the Secretary and Deputy Secretary for Security Matters. In addition, the USDI is the senior official for DOD's Personnel Security Program and has the primary responsibility for providing oversight, guidance, and development for policy and procedures governing civilian, military, and industrial-based personnel security programs within the DOD. In order to address the Department's personnel security policies and practices, I believe it is important to first identify the national-level policy framework. Executive Order 13467 designates the Director of National Intelligence as a security executive agent with the responsibility to develop uniform policies and procedures to ensure effective completion of investigations and determinations of eligibility for access to classified information or to hold national security positions, as well as reciprocal acceptance of those determinations. In addition, EO 13467 designates the Director of the Office of Personnel Management as the suitability executive agent with similar responsibilities for those who have positions that require eligibility for logical and physical access to Federal Government installations and information systems. Finally, 13467 creates a Performance Accountability Council chaired by the Deputy Director for Management in the Office of Management and Budget and includes the DNI and the Director of OPM with the responsibility to ensure alignment of suitability, security, and, as appropriate, contractor employee fitness, investigative, and adjudicative processes. With regard to the oversight roles and responsibilities within DOD, the heads of DOD components are responsible for establishing and overseeing implementation of procedures to ensure prompt reporting of significant derogatory information, unfavorable administrative actions, and adverse information related to its personnel. And this information goes to appropriate officials within their component and, as applicable, to the DOD Consolidated Adjudication Facility. This responsibility applies to military service members, DOD civilians, and embedded contractor personnel. Under the National Industrial Security Program, cleared contractors are required to report adverse information coming to their attention regarding their cleared employees. In addition, the Defense Security Service is responsible for conducting oversight of companies cleared to perform on classified contracts for DOD and 26 other Federal departments and agencies that use DOD industrial security services. The Department has worked very hard to create improvements that produced greater efficiencies and effectiveness in the phases of initiating and adjudicating background investigations. In 2011, the Government Accountability Office removed DOD's Personnel Security Clearance Program from its high-risk list. We have used multiple initiatives to review and confirm the quality of the investigative products we receive, the quality of our adjudications, and the accuracy and completeness of the documentation of adjudicative rationales in support of oversight and reciprocity. In addition, we have implemented a certification process for DOD personnel security adjudicators. I thank you for your time and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Mr. McFarland. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and distinguished members. Recent events, including the horrific actions of Aaron Alexis and the unauthorized disclosure of classified information by Edward Snowden, show how critical it is to continuously improve and strengthen the background investigations process. I am grateful that the committee is holding this hearing and taking steps to address this issue. The U.S. Office of Personnel Management carries an immense responsibility regarding its critical role in safeguarding our country's national security. There is no other entity of the Federal Government that serves in the capacity of a first responder to such a vast linkage of current Federal employees and the constant flow of applicants for government positions. The background investigations OPM performs are the very first step in determining whether a person deserves the trust of the United States and should be permitted access to restricted areas and sensitive information. Director Archuleta has requested several briefings from us on the issue, and we are very appreciative of her strongly stated support for our work. We performed an in-depth examination of Mr. Alexis's background investigation, which was conducted by USIS in its role as a contractor for OPM's Federal Investigative Services. During this review, we found that although the OPM procedures in place at that time were followed, other steps, such as directly contacting the King County District Court, could have provided critical additional information. The committee's recently released report entitled "Slipping Through the Cracks" contains a straightforward analysis that shows several weaknesses in the background investigation process and contains multiple recommendations that I believe will greatly strengthen OPM's program. The Office of the Inspector General is ready and willing to offer any assistance we can as the committee pursues its reform efforts. It has been well publicized that the OIG is the lead investigating entity in a civil suit against USIS. My written testimony more fully describes the allegations contained in the complaint filed by the Department of Justice. In short, the complaint alleges that USIS failed to perform quality reviews related to at least 665,000 cases as required under its contract with OPM. This permitted USIS to release more background investigation cases to OPM, which in turn allowed it to increase the company's bottom line. The exact damages suffered by OPM will be determined by the court at trial. The penalties imposed under the False Claim Act range from $5,500 to $11,000 per false claim or statement. If each of these 665,000 cases were considered a false claim or statement, penalties could range from approximately $3.7 billion to $7.3 billion. In closing, I would like to offer a very sincere thank you to this committee and to their staff for the crafting the recent legislation entitled the OPM IG Act. Subcommittee Chairman Blake Farenthold and Ranking Member Stephen Lynch provided the much-needed forum for us to explain the dilemma facing our Office of Inspector General as a result of an agency funding decision. As you know, an unconscionable denial of funding greatly thwarted our efforts to properly audit and investigate an OPM program of paramount national security concern, the Federal Investigative Services. Regardless, we utilized as best we could our Office's general appropriation funding to accomplish as much oversight as was feasible. Chairman Issa and Ranking Member Cummings, you have our organization's pledge, now with access to the OPM revolving fund, that we will fully engage our audit and investigative resources to protect the national security. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Orzechowski.
Good morning, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss the Federal Security Clearance process. My name is Sue Orzechowski. I'm the Chief Contracts and Compliance Officer of KeyPoint Government Solutions, and I'm also the Acting Program Executive for the KeyPoint OPM Background Investigation Program. I joined KeyPoint shortly after the company won its first government contract in 2004, and my role is to make sure the company does things the right way. The committee initially invited KeyPoint's President, Jeff Schlanger, to testify, and he is here today, but as we discussed with your staff, he recently availed himself of an opportunity to return to public service as the Chief of Staff to the Manhattan District Attorney. He remains on KeyPoint's board, however, and is a key advisor to the company. 14 years ago, KeyPoint was founded as Kroll Government Services. In 2004, OPM expanded its contractor pool from just USIS, and KeyPoint was awarded a position on the IDIQ contract for background investigations. In May 2009, the company was spun off from Kroll and renamed KeyPoint. Over time, KeyPoint has built a high-quality, well-trained network of experienced investigators and a culture of zero tolerance for any lapses of integrity. In large part, KeyPoint's success can be attributed to the fact that our company's focus was and is providing high-quality, fairly priced background investigations to OPM and other government agencies. Today, KeyPoint performs approximately 25% of the fieldwork conducted by contractors for OPM's background investigations, and we are working hard to achieve parity with our major competitor on the contract. As this committee assesses the security clearance process, it will compare the performance of private enterprises and the government. We believe this is an important comparison that will help to achieve our collective goal of protecting our nation's secrets to the greatest extent possible. Although this hearing is highlighting problems with one contractor and not the government, both have experienced their share of problems with a process that requires constant vigilance, integrity, and improvement. KeyPoint has collaborated with various government agencies, including OPM, to improve the background investigation process. An example of this is our Investigator of the Future initiative, through which we are working collaboratively with OPM to develop a tablet-based tool for collecting field data and providing reference resources directly to investigators in the field. We believe the tool will increase quality and efficiency and protect the large amounts of personally identifiable information that we collect and utilize.
OPM contract requirements are rigorous and complex, and we commit significant resources to ensure that we meet or exceed OPM standards. Because of our solid performance on the OPM contract, OPM has encouraged KeyPoint to grow its capacity, and we have done so. Throughout the years, our primary focus has always been on the quality of our casework. We have implemented a comprehensive quality review system to ensure independent review of each case before submission to OPM. We have never wavered from this focus on quality and never intend to do so. It is our understanding that the primary purpose of this hearing is to explore ideas for improving the background investigation process. A few key areas where improvements could be made include: 1, consistency between the requirements set by OPM versus those set by agencies with delegated authority; 2, the use of technology; 3, the use of new sources of information; 4, continuous evaluations; 5, the contracting process; and 6, increased cooperation from State and local authorities. I've provided more details on these points in my written testimony. In conclusion, I'm very proud of the service that KeyPoint has provided to the United States government over the past 14 years and look forward to continued growth. KeyPoint will continue its work to constantly improve the security clearance investigation process and will continue our tradition of providing the highest quality investigations at fair prices to our client agencies and to the taxpayer. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you and welcome your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Rhodes.
Good morning, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Michael Rhodes, and I'm an Executive Vice President with CACI and Manager of the Mission Systems and Services Business Group, the business unit within CACI responsible for our work with the Office of Personnel Management, or OPM. I would like to provide you with a brief introduction to our company and the work we do to assist OPM in the security clearance process. CACI is an organization of nearly 16,000 professionals working in more than 120 offices worldwide with a very diverse information solutions and services customer base. CACI is one of the 3 contractors currently assisting OPM by conducting field work for security clearance investigations. We perform approximately 11% of OPM's fieldwork assignments, which equates to slightly more than 1% of our company's overall annual business base. Having provided mission support services to the government for the past 50 years, we understand that the process of conducting background investigations is fundamental to our national security. On a daily basis, CACI employees work side by side with those people whose lives depend upon us getting the security clearance process right. Like them, our primary commitment is to protecting our national security. Quality, accuracy, and thoroughness must come first. Our business practices and model under the OPM contract demonstrate the emphasis we place on quality. CACI investigators are expected to conduct their fieldwork in accordance with OPM guidelines, and we conduct a robust internal review of investigations for quality, accuracy, and thoroughness prior to submission to OPM for final review and approval. Now, our business model is based upon 4 key principles. First, our corporate culture, the character of the company and its employees, and the importance we place on ethics and integrity. Second, having the right policies and procedures for oversight. Third, effective and continual training. And fourth, a constant auditing and monitoring. Now, to be clear, we do not grant clearances or make recommendations as to who should receive a security clearance. Our primary role in the investigation process is fact-finding, ensuring that we conduct background investigations in accordance with OPM guidelines and contract requirements. We provide the results of our investigation to the government for their approval and use in making their final clearance determinations. We know firsthand about the importance of an effective security clearance process, as more than half of our employees hold clearances that are critical to the work they perform for our country. Even though we were not the investigators for Snowden or Alexis, we were deeply impacted. most notably by the incident at the Navy Yard, where we have a substantial number of CACI employees. We collectively mourn with our nation when these tragedies happen. We at CACI are committed to best practices and continuous improvements in the security clearance process. In this regard, we have suggestions in 3 areas. First, making background investigations more efficient. Second, more effectively capturing information. And third, strengthening contractor oversight. On behalf of my company, and as a former active duty Army officer and a security clearance holder for over 30 years supporting the intelligence community, I thank you for the opportunity to present CACI's input on these matters, and I appreciate the courtesies extended to us by you and your staff during the course of this inquiry. Thank you for inviting me to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Phillips.
Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. My name is Sterling Phillips, and since January of 2013, I have served as CEO of USIS, a federal contractor headquartered in Falls Church, Virginia. As part of a wholesale leadership change at the company, I joined USIS after more than 30 years in senior management positions with federal contractors. I'm here today representing more than 6,000 USIS employees dedicated to excellence in supporting the missions of our government customers. That number includes 2,000 field investigators across the country who conduct background investigations, as well as nearly 400 of their colleagues involved in assuring the quality of our work. Over the past 9 months, the disclosure of classified material by Edward Snowden and the Navy Yard tragedy caused by Aaron Alexis have caused a great deal to be written and said about the security clearance process in general and USIS specifically. Much of this public commentary has been factually inaccurate. Today, I hope to correct these inaccuracies and clarify the role contractors like USIS play in the nation's security clearance process so as to provide you with better insight as to how this process might be improved. In order to understand the process, it is critical to recognize that USIS and OPM's other contractors have no role in deciding whether an individual actually receives or retains a security clearance. We only collect and report information, and we do not even make a recommendation. The decision-making process is known as adjudication, and that authority lies solely with the agency requesting the clearance. All OPM background investigations, whether conducted by contractors or federal employees, follow specific procedures and protocols established by OPM. Contractors like USIS rigorously adhere to the established investigative process and have no flexibility in terms of how an investigation is conducted. Once an investigation is complete and accepted by the government, our work is done and we have no further role in the oversight or monitoring of cleared personnel. In fact, contractors are not allowed to maintain any of the case materials or information, all of which are returned to OPM. Our performance goals for all cases, including Snowden and Alexis, are to strictly follow the OPM process and to meet all OPM standards for quality in our work. If we ever fail to do so, we're promptly notified by OPM with a detailed description of any defects. All indications to USIS are that we met all standards on each of these 2 cases. Mr. Chairman, in my 13 months at USIS, I have been impressed with the dedication and professionalism of our investigators and other employees. They understand that they are performing a sensitive and vital national security function. Many of our investigators came to us from the military or law enforcement. They understand their responsibilities and take them seriously. It is important to note that all investigations are fixed-price products. USIS has an extensive and costly quality review system, and all of our work is subsequently reviewed by OPM and the adjudicating agency. At any time, the USIS National Quality Team, OPM, or the requesting agency can send the case back for additional work at no extra cost to the government. The cost to USIS of quality defects and rework is high. Both short and long term, it is in the best financial interest of the company to do the job right the first time. In any enterprise of this size, however, from time to time there are individuals who fail to meet our high standards. But I submit to you that in USIS, those individuals are an aberration and not the norm. When USIS suspects that an individual investigator has misrepresented or falsified his or her work product, we immediately suspend that investigator and launch an internal investigation. If our investigation determines that work has been falsified or misrepresented, we proactively report and refer those cases to OPM and cooperate with the U.S. Attorney's Office for subsequent prosecution. As you know, the U.S. Department of Justice has intervened in a civil false claims suit against USIS. That matter is ongoing and has not been resolved. I was not at USIS when the alleged conduct in that case occurred, but I can tell you that the allegations in the complaint relate to a small group of individuals over a specific time period and are inconsistent with our values and strong record of customer service. Since learning of these allegations nearly 2 years ago, the company has acted decisively to ensure the quality of USIS work and compliance with OPM requirements. New leadership has been installed, oversight has been enhanced, and internal controls strengthened. From the outset, the company has fully cooperated with the government's investigation and will continue to do so. Finally, I hope this hearing is helpful to you as you assess possible policy changes in America's security clearance process. USIS and our 6,000 employees are prepared to assist you in any way that we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I have that for a second? I'll recognize myself. Director, excuse me. We received a list of 450 cities that do not cooperate fully, that are as part of an OPM list of cities that simply will not answer questions in all or in part as to criminal backgrounds and so on of individuals. We were also given a redacted version, which basically takes out all the names and is useless. Would you agree that the 450 cities not willing to cooperate should be in the public interest made available?
Mr. Chairman, there are about 18,000 jurisdictions that exist across the United States that are
right. There's 18,000, many of which are not on this list. You have 450 jurisdictions, including, at the time of Aaron Alexis, Seattle, Baltimore, New York, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C., that were not cooperating. Aaron Alexis was, in fact, somebody for whom OPM had on the list, to our understanding at the time, that Seattle was not going to give you that information that ultimately we didn't have as to the shooting that Aaron Alexis had already done. My question to you is, can you give this committee any reason that the names of those municipalities should be withheld from the public?
Those 450 names have been discussed and mentioned, and we would work with you to provide those names of the cities that are not in.
Okay. Well, we have a list. We would like to make it public. We believe that it says, and I'm respecting the status that was on it. It says sensitive law enforcement information for house use only, that was stamped on our copy. It's this chairman's opinion that this is information the public has a right to know, that their city is not providing criminal information when somebody is receiving a security clearance such as Aaron Alexis.
Mr. Issa, we'd be glad to work with you to release those names.
Thank you. I appreciate that. As I previously said, obviously at the time that Aaron Alexis was being checked, Seattle wasn't compliant or participating. Is it possible that, in fact, the inspector, and I'm not trying to defend anybody here, the inspector that was doing the sheet looked and said, this is on the list of people, of cities that are already not compliant. It's not reasonable for us to go and ask for that record?
I couldn't speculate to the mindset of the investigator at that time.
Do you believe this committee should empower OPM and the Department of Justice, questions for Mr. Lewis, to have leverage over cities to ensure that if they're not going to comply, that Federal funds that help them build those very databases be withheld, or in some other way use Federal clout to ensure that we do get full information when trying to clear individuals for sensitive information? Mr. Lewis.
I can't comment on
Would you like to have tools to see that that happens?
We would like to have access to that information. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, it is the committee's intention to provide tools to the executive branch to encourage that compliance. For the Director, Ms. Archuleta, what have you done in order to reduce the amount of that list? Have you taken any, in those 3 months, any material actions that might cause cities, other than being on a list that we might publicly disclose, to want to cooperate more fully?
Most recently, the District of Columbia has agreed to provide that information, and Mr. Miller, as the Director of FIS, has been working within the compact to continue discussions with some of those major cities who have not been providing the information. We will continue to pursue that. It is an important relationship and information that we would be most helpful in our background investigation.
Thank you. I have one question that perplexes me a little bit, and it's kind of a billion-dollar question here. My understanding, and Mr. McFarland, you probably know the case history on it, OPM discovered and was working with the Department of Justice prior to January of 2014. I'm sorry, prior to January 2011, was aware of the dumping that went on at Mr. Phillips's company. Is that correct?
I believe that is.
So the United States government discovered dumping prior to the filing in Alabama by Blake Percival of a KETAM case. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And yet, when I put this in the record already, but when the Director of Personnel Management, OPM Director, said that Department of Justice had filed, that wasn't true. Department of Justice joined a case in which the recipient will be a private individual that will receive large amounts of money if, in fact, there is a payment from Mr. Phillips's company. Is that correct? My question to anyone on the panel is there any good reason for the government to discover that they've been wronged by a company and then allow an insider to become a KETAM recipient of millions of dollars because the government doesn't act, and then have the government join the case much later with righteous indignation when, in fact, in my review of this case filed by Department of Justice against USIS, all they've really done is asserted the same things previously asserted in the KETAM case. Anyone want to comment on that? Because there's a lot of U.S. dollars that are going to go to outside lawyers and to an individual who, in fact, doesn't appear to be the first to discover or have some rights in this case.
Mr. Issa, in April of 2011, Mr. Miller noticed and his staff noticed an anomaly in the cases that were being sent forth from USIS, and began a dialogue with USIS to discover why that was happening. They had introduced some new automation that was indicating to them that the number of cases being reviewed were much higher than—
Okay, and my time has expired. I just want to very quickly say, was that discovery based on Blake Percival's information?
No, it was not.
So the government discovered that, in fact, it had been wronged, potentially, and yet we have an individual with a billion-dollar KETAM case that the government is in second position on. Is that correct? If I'm wrong in any way, I'd like to understand that.
Again, I would reiterate that in April we began to uncover that anomaly.
Well, I'm going to take the privilege of referring this over to the committee next door, to Judiciary, because I'm deeply concerned that the government is not, in this case, potentially protecting its own right to get a recovery in its entirety and not share it with a third party. Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much. I want to join with the Chairman with regard to this whole issue of law enforcement officers cooperating with your agency, Ms. Archuleta.
Yes.
I learned that there were some in my own district, and I'm going to be urging them to cooperate. I think this is so very, very important. I want to go to you, Mr. Phillips. You said something in your written statement, and I think you said it in your oral statement. You said, but I can tell you that the allegations in the complaint relate to a small group of individuals over a specific time period and are inconsistent with our values and strong record of customer service. I can understand that. It makes sense. But would you agree that the top people are gone? I mean, they've either been fired or they left, right? They were the ones that were orchestrating this. Hello?
The people associated with the allegations are gone from the company.
Yeah, they're gone. They've been either fired or they left.
And they were at multiple levels in the company.
Multiple levels. And so, you know, when you say just a few bad apples, I mean, this is a little bit more than that. And I don't think the Justice Department, we would not have that many people having left. And I don't think the Justice Department would be doing what it's doing if it were just a few bad apples. Now, that doesn't mean, I'm not talking about probably 95% of the employees, but when you've got key people, and from what we've learned, they were key, doing certain things, making certain decisions, you wonder about statements like the one you just made. But we'll come back to you. Director Archuleta, records produced by OPM to this committee show that during the period of the alleged fraud, OPM was paying bonuses to USIS for what you thought was very rapid progress in clearing cases. Between 2008 and 2012, OPM paid about $16 million to USIS just for bonuses under these contracts. Director, if USIS was defrauding OPM to meet its revenue targets, and if it met timeliness goals only by not doing quality reviews 40% of the time, what is OPM doing to recover those ill-gotten bonuses?
The bonuses that were paid to USIS, which were last provided in 2010, were bonuses that were provided to them under the performance-based standards within the contract. The government attempting to recover those bonuses as part of the civil action that has been filed, and no bonuses have been awarded to USIS under the current leadership.
So you're saying justice is trying to get those bonuses back? Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, as part of the civil action charging fraud, that is part of the recovery.
Director, would the staff put up the chart for the USIS bonuses? Now, the CEO, you know, we asked the committee to provide us with the bonuses that were paid to employees who were involved in the alleged fraud. Here's some of what they told us. And so you've got the chart there, and the CEO received almost $500,000 in the first year of the alleged fraud. Director Archuleta, OPM does not approve these bonuses to individual people at USIS. Is that correct?
They are performance-based within the contract, and not to individuals, but to the company.
So, so OPM doesn't decide who gets the check. You just basically make sure that they get money. The company gets money, and then they
based on its performance.
All right. So let's ask the company, Mr. Phillips. So I know you are relatively new at USIS, and I know you've got a tough job. You were brought in to clean up this mess. But as the CEO of USIS, you have a boss, do you not?
Yes, sir.
And that boss is Integrity, the privately held holding company that owns USIS. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Integrity is a big company, is it not?
The holding company is a relatively small organization.
Well, but through its subsidiaries, it has received over $2 billion from contracts from a dozen federal agencies. That's pretty big to me, $2 billion. Would you agree that's pretty big for the federal government?
Yes.
And that's what we've tallied. Integrity was also the boss of your predecessor, the President and CEO, who is alleged to have directed the fraud. Now, he got some big bonuses. My staff asked USIS for the company's bonus policies during the years of the alleged fraud, and what we got back were documents marked integrity, quote, end of quote. So the bonuses awarded to the top officials at USIS during the alleged fraud were made according to a formula devised by the parent company, Integrity. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
According to Integrity, bonus formula between 20% and 25% of an executive bonus was dependent upon whether he met his objectives and whether he performed well. So, if you are the CEO of USIS, who at Integrity determines your bonus, is that right? They'll determine yours.
Yes, they do.
Who evaluates your performance as the CEO?
Integrity and the Board of Directors.
And so, do we have any names?
We're in the process of reorganizing Integrity. The Board of Directors is comprised of principals with Providence Equity, the owners of the company, and I report directly to the board today.
So you don't have, somebody doesn't call you and check on you. The whole board calls you. I mean, how does that work? I mean, somebody is gonna make sure you get a bonus. And if you deserve a bonus, I know you're going to insist that you get a bonus. Does that mean you go to the board to ask for the bonus? Or do you answer to someone?
The Board of Directors would determine my bonus. We have monthly board meetings. So there is no CEO of Integrity, as there was in the past. So
okay.
The board does, in fact, to your question, the board does, in fact, evaluate my performance and determine whether I will get a bonus.
Well, who specifically at Integrity approved the more than $1 million in bonuses for your predecessor, former CEO Bill Mixon, who has been accused of directing this fraud?
Specifically, I do not know who was CEO at the time these bonuses were paid. I'd have to look at the timing, and there have been a series of CEOs over the last 10 years at Integrity. Well,
as I close, let me say this. Mr. Chairman, I think that Mr. Phillips' testimony today raises the question about whether or not officials at Integrity knew about the alleged fraud, and when did they know it, and what, if anything, did they do about it. Integrity is a big Federal contractor through its subsidiaries, and the American people have a right to know just what kind of people are managing those subsidiaries, to which the government gave over $2 billion in recent years. Now, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put the bonus chart and the list of Integrity contracts in the record. The bonus chart is right here. Just so
without objections, the bonus chart will be made part of the record.
And the contracts of Integrity.
And the contracts of Integrity were referenced to it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Without objection. So, okay, let me recognize myself. Well, we're here because one of the most horrible incidents and failure of some of the systems that we have in place to protect us failed, and a lot of people died. Just an incredible tragedy. Some of it is the result of the failure of adequate contract management. We've heard some issues raised about some other failures in contract management. We also have a failure of the security clearance process, obvious in some way. And then if you look at the final action of the depraved individual, in this case, the failure of our mental health system, someone who was troubled, obtained a weapon, and destroyed the lives of a number of people. First of all, Mr. Phillips, you said you collect data and you give it to OPM. So you're a data collection agent, basically?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Archuleta, you have about, what, 2.3 million people you do clearance on? Is that annually, or is that just?
That's annually, sir.
Annually. So that's a huge amount. Just for the record, I was in Congress, actually chaired civil service when we created the initial ESOP, we gave the Federal employees the right to run that initial company, which evolved into Mr. Phillips' company. We now have 3 companies, private companies, that do 70% of the work. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it would be almost impossible for OPM to do it all itself, given $2.3 million. So we rely on contractors and contract management to execute those clearances. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. So they are collecting the data. The problem is it's sort of garbage in, garbage out. And we have flaws in the system. We see Mr. Alexis, and I went back and read the report, the 2004 incident, he was really, even if Seattle reported, he was never adjudicated as with a felony or even a misdemeanor. The charges were dropped. Is that correct, Mr. Phillips?
That is correct.
Okay. So then the question is the failure of the system to periodically review folks. Now, he was in the Navy, but he went on to a private contractor. Is that correct, too? Are you aware of that, Mr. Phillips?
That is my understanding.
Okay. And I see there's a 5 to 10, maybe 15-year review. Do you think that's adequate for these clearances, Ms. Archuleta?
I am very supportive of a continuous evaluation.
And we should do that. The problem I have is Ms. Ordakowski here, she's talked about and gave us some recommendations. Is technology, we could easily compare the data coming in. We probably should look at some stages because, again, the ultimate decision, Mr. Lewis, is given by the agency for the clearance. Is that correct? And you gave that. Either as this individual was a Navy person, first got it as Navy, then he shifted to a contract person where he committed the deed. Is that correct, Mr. Lewis?
That is
okay.
correct.
So I think we ought to look at some point in which there is a re-review. Certainly what the Chairman brought up and entities not reporting, again, garbage in, garbage out, we won't know. But I think for improvement, we need to look at if they shift positions and the contractor should, we should do a review. It could easily be run through technology, although, dear God, I have the greatest reservation about OPM and technology, having now chairing the Government Operations Subcommittee, seen a $271 million, almost a third of $1 billion fiasco in trying to just keep the records of Federal employees for retirement, et cetera. And we're now still doing that by hand. Are we doing that by hand, ma'am? Do you know?
I do not know.
Oh, well, do you know, Ms. Archuleta? You know the failure of the trying to institute technology for records for retirement?
That's why I've instituted an IT modernization plan at IT.
Yeah, okay. Well, we spent hundreds of millions, and it's a fiasco. So this is also back to contract management, the top personnel in OPM, and managing contracts. We've got 3 contracts for these folks. We've got contracts for IT. And certainly technology could give us a better handle on reviewing people. You know, people are normal today. Look at this panel. They all look pretty normal, don't they? But they could flip out on you in a few years, particularly some. So we do need some mechanism to review people periodically as they take on new roles. Wouldn't you say that would be good, Ms. Archuleta?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Phillips, what do you think? Don't tie your shoelaces now. What?
No, I agree.
Okay. Mr. Lewis?
Very much agree.
Okay. Mr. McFarland?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Well, again, and then we haven't even talked about the failure of mental health. Government employees, be they military, private contractors, do not go out and shoot multiple people. There's something wrong. Again, this individual had incidents of severe mental health problems and yet obtained a weapon, and yet, and we have to look at also how you get a sawed-off shotgun into a government facility and then kill people. So I would like also, if you could please provide a copy of the IT modernization plan to the committee. I guess we'll ask Ms. Archuleta for that.
It's my intent to discuss the IT modernization plan with the committee, yes.
Okay. I'm over slightly, but not as much as Mr. Cummings. Let me yield next to Ms. Norton with trepidation. Thank you. And joy. And joy.
All right.
Good to see you, Ms.
Now that's been corrected. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, this city was somehow spared in 9/11, and there are theories as to how that occurred, yet we were hit very hard at the Navy Yard, and we were hit by a deranged man who, as I understand it, had the second highest security clearance. Mr. Lewis, is that the second highest security clearance you can get?
There's secret and top secret, so yeah, yes.
So he was pretty much up there. As we look back over his history, he had some arrests. They weren't reported from Seattle. He was arrested in Georgia for disorderly conduct the same year that he got his security clearance, apparently. And then in 2010 in Texas for firing a gun through the ceiling of his downstairs neighbor. And then just a month, and here is where the tragedy that we're still feeling in this city is. Just a month before the Navy Yard incident, the Rhode Island police were cognizant enough, intelligent enough. I'm not sure they knew, given, in fact, I believe they did not know, because they were called to the hotel. And here's the hotel who had the consciousness, because Alexis had apparently called down saying he was hearing voices. So here we have people without security clearances that understand there is something wrong with this man. Now, first let me ask about Alexis's run-ins with the law in Georgia and Texas. Did any part of the Federal government, Mr. Lewis, did you know, did the government know about either of these run-ins with the law, Texas and Georgia?
Well, because there is a 10-year interval between investigations, that information, unless it became known to the commander or supervisor of Mr. Alexis, would not have been reported to the Department of Defense.
Well, are you saying it was not reported then?
That's correct.
Had it been reported, would it have been, would those incidents have been investigated?
Upon the receipt of derogatory information, the DOD Consolidated Adjudications Facility would have made a determination, does this clearance need to be suspended or revoked? Is additional investigation required? So additional action would have been taken.
Well, first of all, as you indicated, this man had a security clearance that enabled him to go for 10 years without review. I can't understand the original set of the 10-year notion. Even the most stable person has incidents in his life in a decade. Where did the 10-year period come from?
The 10-year period is part of the current Federal investigative standards that are in place today. These standards are under review, most prominently with the suitability and security processes review that's ongoing as we speak. And
so you're not telling me where it came from. I mean, again, we have a series of people who have no expertise, who understood that this man was probably needed help, and yet the government sets a 10-year period during which it doesn't even have to, unless well, I'll get to the report in a moment, but it doesn't have to investigate to see if there's been any deterioration in the person. You don't know where this came from. You don't know what the basis. Would you report to this? Would you find the paperwork that indicated the rationale for the 10-year period and reported and write that within the 30-day period to the chairman of this committee. The Rhode Island incident is the most troubling because Alexis was working as a contractor for a company called Experts. Was Experts aware of this erratic behavior?
Experts did become aware of this information. They were required to report it. They failed to do so.
What has happened to Experts in the meantime? Is Experts still a contractor with the Federal Government?
I don't know if they're still a contractor, but their security clearance has been adversely impacted. They were invalidated.
Ms. Archuleta, do you know if Experts is still excuse me?
I apologize. I would rely on Mr. Lewis's assessment of that. It seems that their contract has been suspended. Is that what I heard, Mr. Lewis?
Their security clearance has been suspended.
Their clearance has been
suspended. So that means they can't do this work any longer. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for it seems clear.
Thank you.
And that's why I asked the report to the chairman, that we've got to know the basis for the 10 years, and we've got to assure that there's continuous monitoring of anybody who has a security or a top security clearance.
I thank the gentlelady for an excellent line of questioning. Let me yield to the distinguished gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner.
I would like to echo what the Chair said. I think Ms. Norton gave us a great description of what we see as the disintegration of the individual and raised two very important issues on the 10-year evaluation process and also the issue of failure of reporting requirements or failure to report when the requirement existed. But I'd like to do the follow-on then to Ms. Norton's line of questioning. I understand that even when you get to the 10-year period and when you get to the review of someone to reaffirm their classified status, that there's difficulty with the cooperation with State and local government officials. Now, I served as a mayor for the City of Dayton, and I'm also on the Armed Services Committee here, and in addition to this committee. So the issue of clearances, as we look to Snowden and the other things that are going on, obviously the issue of the Navy Yard is one that gives us a picture of our continuous vulnerability, not just this incident. But I'm concerned that it's my understanding that there are also issues of State and local law enforcement sharing information with the Federal Government in the security process, that although there's a requirement for disclosure and for full cooperation, that in fact there may be some impediments. Ms. Archuleta, if you could please speak on that issue. Do you have State and local agencies, governments that do not take this issue as seriously and that participate at varying levels, and is that an impediment for you?
I wouldn't classify it in just one category. I would say that there are some that have not provided the information, choose not to provide. Others are smaller jurisdictions that, in fact, may not have the capability of providing that information. Others, because of their just the small size of their jurisdiction, may not have the records that are complete records going several years or many years back. So there are many reasons why local law enforcement agencies are not providing the information, but the most important part here is that we must take every step, and I would be supportive of looking at how we can work with local law enforcement agencies and the courts to provide this information. This is part of the President's 120-day PAC review and of the quality assessment working group that is ongoing right now.
Okay. Well, even though you sort of sidestepped it there for a moment, I think your answer is still very troubling. So let's back up for a moment and review your answer. You said there are jurisdictions that choose not to share the information.
Yes.
Although you indicated that there are jurisdictions that perhaps don't have the resources, there are those who just are not sharing the information with you. And I think you would acknowledge to this committee that the information is critical, is it not?
Yes, that's correct, sir.
And then the issue of resources. Although there are communities that would indicate that that the period of time of the review may be difficult for them for their record keeping. I mean, we're talking only, we're in present day. We're talking 10-year periods. We're not going to the 1800s, correct? I mean, these are present records that we're asking for information on.
I can't comment as to why they believe their resources aren't there, sir.
I see. It is troubling for you, though, correct?
Yes, it is.
Are you concerned at all that the amount of classified material post 9/11 may be resulting in a proliferation of individuals having clearance? That the fact that the data that we now consider to be classified is so voluminous that, in fact, it is pushing the system in providing increased classified status to individuals?
I know that the Director of National Intelligence is looking at this very serious issue as to the standards for granting clearances and also who should receive those clearances. It's an ongoing review that he takes very seriously, and we're working with him in every way.
But you do consider that the amount of classified material certainly is a factor that's pushing this, a driver of the issue of the number of classified status.
Who is eligible to receive clearances is a decision of the DNI.
Ms. Archuleta, is there a difference between the manner in which contractors and government employees go through the clearance process?
No, the same standards for Federal investigations or background investigations is the same for both contractors and Federal employees.
Going back to the issue of communities that do not participate or choose not to participate, what actions do you take to try to encourage their participation?
We work with those, directly with those jurisdictions, and also with our councils and with other Federal agencies to persuade and encourage their cooperation with our investigations.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I could just one more. It does inhibit, though, the process, does it not?
We attempt to get as much information as we can, and the records from local law enforcement is very important to us. And so, as I said before, I'm very supportive of ways that we can encourage these entities to provide us the information.
I thank the gentleman and the witness. We'll go to Mr. Lynch, gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses as well for your attendance. This was a terrible tragedy, and I just want to get at the depth of this tragedy. I'm going to mention the 12 individuals who were killed during this attack. Michael Arnold, age 59. He had been a pilot with the Navy for many years. He had a wife and 2 grown sons. Martin Bodrog, age 54, graduated of the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis. He was a surface warfare officer in the Navy. He left a wife and 3 daughters. Arthur Daniels, age 51, left a wife and 5 children. Sylvia Frazier, age 53. She had 5 sisters and a brother. She worked at the Naval Sea Systems Command. She also served as a deaconess and altar counselor at the Rema Christian Center Church in Washington, D.C. here, loved by many. Kathleen Gard, age 62. She worked as a financial analyst at the Navy Yard. She and her husband had an adult son and daughter. J.J. Johnson, age 73. He was father to 4 adult daughters and had 11 grandchildren. Mary Frances DiLorenzo Knight, age 51. She and her husband had 2 daughters. Frank Kohler was only 50 years old, left behind his wife and 2 daughters. He's a big-time Rotary Club participant. Vishnu Pandit, age 61. Mr. Pandit and his wife, Anjali, had become grandparents recently when one of their 2 sons had a daughter. Kenneth Proctor, age 46, left behind a wife and 2 teenage sons. Gerald Reed, 58. He and his wife, Kathy, have a grown daughter, Jessica, and she's got 3 granddaughters. Well, they have 3 granddaughters. And Richard Michael Ridgell, age 52. Mr. Ridgell was working as a security officer at the Navy Yard after having worked several years in Iraq on behalf of our country. His wife and his 3 daughters remember him as a brave man and a great father. So this process, this current security clearance process allowed this to happen. It allowed Mr. Alexis to get in there and do what he did. I've got some legislation that I dropped last night, and H.R. 4022, it's the Security Clearance Reform Act of 2014. It will introduce a continuous review of security clearances rather than these periodic events that we're seeing. It will also withhold some Federal funding, a penalty, if you will, for jurisdictions that do not cooperate with us when somebody from their jurisdiction applies for a security clearance from the Federal Government. It also gets at a problem that we had with USIS, which is there was a conflict there. USIS has had two contracts. One was an investigative contract, and one was a review of another contract, a support services contract that allowed USIS to review their own work. That's how this was allowed to remain hidden for a long period of time, because the USIS reviewers that were reviewing USIS investigations basically sandbagged the reviews and allowed the dumping to occur. That's a real problem. And so the legislation that I have, among many other things, also gets at that issue, that conflict issue. Mr. McFarland, you are a frequent flyer to this committee. Sorry to see you here again today, but do you think that this dual contract situation where you got a contractor reviewing its own work, does that contribute to the reduced quality of those reviews, and does it introduce a conflict into the system?
It's an absolute conflict, no question about it.
Yeah.
And
okay.
it did do quite a job on the quality.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say that I know we have a lot of partisan issues before this committee sometimes. This is not one of those cases. We've had great cooperation from majority staff and minority staff. We've had great cooperation between the members on both sides of the aisle. This is the way it's supposed to work. We're honestly, I think, embarked on an effort to fix this situation. And like I say, I've got some legislation here, H.R. 4022. I would welcome co-sponsors from both sides of the aisle, and any changes or improvements to that bill would be welcome. And I yield back.
Thank you. At this time, I'll recognize myself. I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing today. I believe one of the primary tasks of the Federal Government is to maintain our national security. As the tragic shooting at the naval yards clearly shows, the clearance process is deeply flawed, and the American people have suffered as a result. It is essential that we now determine the best way to fix the loopholes in this process and prevent a tragedy such as this shooting from ever happening again. These are the questions here. Thank you. Clearance holders must self-report derogatory information that could impact their clearance. In practice, such self-reporting is rare. Our security clearance, Mr. Lewis, are security clearance holders required to report any derogatory information once they have obtained a clearance?
Yes, they're required to do such self-reporting as well as their supervisors.
What types of information should be reported?
Example would be bankruptcy, if they're arrested, things of that nature.
Do a clearance holder's commanding officers or employers have an obligation to report any derogatory information?
Yes, they do.
How often is such derogatory information actually reported? And I want to emphasize actually reported.
So we've looked at data that's reported into the DOD system of record for security clearances, and it is in the 50,000 reports a year range. There are many reports of derogatory.
You said 50,000?
Yes.
What is the Department of Defense doing to incentivize reporting of derogatory information? I mean, we don't, you said 50,000 actually reported, but how do we determine whether who wasn't reported or what wasn't reported?
You speak to a fundamental issue, which is partially educating commanders and supervisors as to their responsibilities. And then the second half of that equation would be holding individuals accountable for failure to execute their responsibility.
Okay, let's see if I understand this right now. Somebody's hired, they got a security clearance, and it's reviewed. How often?
Currently at the top secret level, it's a 5-year reinvestigation process. At the secret and below level, it's 10 years. That is going to be transitioning to a 5-year recurring review, and we do believe that continuous evaluation, ongoing reviews of available records should occur as well.
Okay, in the review process, are you permitted to check the social media like Facebook, person's Facebook if they have one? What else? Any other, like what's on them on Wikipedia or something?
Social media is not a tool that's currently being used. However, it is being studied. And one of the challenges of using social media is validating the information that's available on the web.
Okay, and what do you do with the information of a previous investigation that's maybe 10 years old?
Well, as part of the reinvestigation process, the the previous investigation is looked at for any derogatory information there, looking for trends, looking for ongoing concerns, and it's all part of a whole person concept where you look at what has happened in the person's life, what challenges they've faced, whether or not they've had, issues with credit or alcohol, and that's part of the adjudicative process.
Great. Thank you very much. The Chair now recognizes Mr. Conley from Virginia.
I thank the Chair.
I'm sorry. I apologize. Ms. Duckworth?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Justice Department's complaint against USIS alleges that between March 2008 and September, the company dumped the background investigations by submitting them to OPM as complete for payment, but without ever completing the quality review. We've discussed this, but I'm really struck by how massive the scale of this fraud is. Approximately 665,000 cases were dumped over the 4.5-year period. The fact that the Justice Department alleges that USIS dumped cases, knowing that there could potentially be quality issues associated with those dumped, we have seen from the Aaron Alexis case the damage that one person can inflict. Inspector General McFarland, in your prepared remarks, you expressed concern about the overall effect of USIS's alleged fraud. You stated that you believe that USIS's fraud may have caused serious damage to national security. Can you elaborate on that, and why are you concerned?
Yes, I'd be happy to. The overall concern that national security is damaged is sometimes hard to find a specific example. I guess a good example that we're dealing with today, though, would be the Aaron Alexis case, because so often you'll see the plaque that says, if you see something, say something. Well, I think this case is a perfect example of people that saw something but didn't say anything. And, going back to the police department that refused to give the record, even that is awfully hard to understand. I did hear at one time that part of their reason was that they felt it was a liability to give out something if there was not a conviction. Well, I applaud the committee for thinking in the big terms of doing something about it, because it's going to take a big operation to change all of this. The Navy, as an example, they were told that there was an arrest, and they were also told that he was not truthful. on his clearance papers. I would think that that probably should have been enough not to give him a secret clearance, at least to look into it further. There's a lot of wrongdoing going on. Nothing more stunning, of course, than what USIS did. It's just kind of unbelievable to me that somebody can come to work one day and basically call in some supervisor and says, well, we're going to really put the screws to the people now. Let's not do this or that. Let's just feather our nest. And that is just an absolute shame today to have to witness something like that. So anyway, the bottom line is I hope that the committee can go forward and the draft report that they just finished writing, I think that pretty much says it all about the conditions of things.
Can you speak to the fact that USIS also performed the quality review for those very same cases that they dumped? So basically, you have the single contractor both performing the the investigations, and then another branch of the same company verifying that that they had reviewed. Do you think it's a conflict of interest to have the same company conduct a background investigation and a final quality review?
I absolutely do.
This is really a very serious concern. I'd like to provide Director Archuleta the opportunity to respond to this. Director Archuleta, do you know whether the 665,000 cases were allegedly dumped by USIS underwent sufficient quality reviews?
Yes, there's a it's a multi-layered process for reviewing for a background investigation. The contract requires that USIS would conduct its own quality review before sending it on for a final quality review, either conducted by the contractor in the support services or by the Federal employee. With regard to the Alexis case, I might add that both our internal review and the IG's review stated that USIS followed the standards that were in place for the background investigation. However, this does not negate the outrageous behavior that the previous management engaged in during 2008 through 2012 of the dumping of the cases. Let me just add that last week I took steps to federalize that process so that now only Federal employees are reviewing in that last stage those contracts or those background investigations.
Let's hope you get the resources to do that as well. I'm out over time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have two areas I want to hit on. Ms. Archuleta, we've heard a lot of questions and testimony with respect to local authorities not providing the level of information that you guys are needing. Could you tell me the reasons for that? I understand some may be financial. Are there other reasons they're not giving that information?
Yes, sir. Sometimes they choose not to. Other times resources are unavailable to them to do so.
As a former member of the Homeland Security Committee, we do a lot of grants to local police departments. It seems like if they don't want to help us, we might be a little bit more reluctant to help them. Would you have a problem with us withholding all or some funds to police departments that don't cooperate?
I am supportive of making sure that we can get these records. It's a very important part of our background investigations, and I know that the work of this committee as well as the President's PAC is looking at this very serious issue.
As far as the overall guidelines, and I don't mean to rush, I have a limited amount of time. Yes. With respect to overall guidelines, do you know the date of the guidelines for what's done in a background check? When were those last reviewed, the procedure and what's checked?
I don't know, sir, but I'd be glad to get that for you. All
right, well, it's my understanding they're quite about. Do y'all, in part of the background check, do y'all Google the person?
The use of social media is manner in which is a technique that is being reviewed right now, and recommendations have been provided by the DNI and supported by OPM.
But currently, we don't check.
They're under review right now.
Or news stories on Google or anything like that.
I think just making sure that the quality and the validation of that information is secure.
All right, and then let's talk a little about the ongoing investigations. We've heard several people, list some of Mr. Alexis's very questionable behavior between his security, shooting out his ceiling, and an arrest and some other issues there. There's nothing in place now, right, to do that. The only way you would have find out about it is if he's self-reported.
That's exactly right, sir.
Now, doesn't the FBI get information about arrests and convictions and things like that automatically? Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that, sir. I'd be glad to find out for you.
All right, because it seems, and you don't. There's no routine, ongoing checking somebody's credit score. You get in trouble. You're susceptible to corruption by a foreign government or whatever. So there's no ongoing check as easy as a credit score.
There are credit scores, but there's not continuous evaluation. So once the first investigation or background investigation is conducted, in Mr. Alexis' case, it would be 10 years later. But the issue of continuous evaluation is one that is very important to me and to the President's PAC, as well as the ODNI.
Is that something? It seems like that's something that could, at a very simple level, be automated. You've got their name, you've got their date of birth, you've got their Social Security number. Okay, after healthcare.gov, I'm questionable about the government's ability to automate anything or compute its way out of a paper bag, but that seems like a relatively trivial action. Mr. Phillips, your company does background checks, albeit, we've had some issues there, but is that something y'all could easily automate, you think?
Are you asking about the...
just checking somebody's credit score on a regular basis or polling databases to see if somebody's name pops up?
In my view, that would be a fairly straightforward application of technology to continuous monitoring.
Mr. McFarland, you're the IG there. You've got your hands in the water. You got some other things that could really easily and inexpensively be done to do ongoing checks?
Well, the point that you just made about isn't there somewhere you can reach out, I think the FBI, they collect a tremendous amount of arrest records throughout the country. And Mr.
Lewis, you're with the DOD. The holding of a security clearance isn't a right. It's a privilege. We don't have to wait until something is finally adjudicated, whether you're convicted or not. Shouldn't an arrest be enough to just raise a red flag?
Certainly there's information in arrest records that is worthy of consideration for whether or not someone should continue to have a claim.
And sometimes between arrest and conviction could potentially be years. Meanwhile, that person still has access to sensitive information. Is that not correct?
That is a concern, very much.
All right. I see my time has expired, but I do want to join with the other side of the aisle and the rest of this committee in coming up with a solution to give you guys the tools that you need to help keep our country safe and make this process much more streamlined, much more automated, and much more responsive to the needs, so we avoid another tragedy like Navy Yards. And I'll yield back.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connell.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And welcome to our panel. Mr. McFarland, we had a colloquy earlier between Ms. Archuleta and the Chairman of 450 municipalities or jurisdictions that do not exchange information, background information with us when we're doing a security check, and one wonders what could go wrong with that. So, for example, if they're not exchanging information with the Federal Government on a background check, could that mean that arrest records are not known at all?
Yes, that's right.
Could it mean that somebody's a child predator and we don't know that at all?
That's correct.
There could be some kind of recorded deviant behavior and we wouldn't know that at all.
That's correct.
Well, that's an extraordinary hole in the system, is it not?
It truly is.
I would remind my Republican friends who raised the question of maybe we should make certain kinds of federal assistance contingent on their full cooperation, a desirable goal, but in light of the Supreme Court ruling in the Affordable Care Act on Medicaid, that tactic of encouraging cooperation may in fact be unconstitutional. So we may have to look for other ways to do that. Ms. Archuleta, I assume you share Mr. McFarland's concern that this is a big hole in the system.
Yes, and the discussion, sir, as I mentioned before, are happening right now within the President's PAC as well as within the Quality Assessment Working Group that includes OPM and the DNI.
Question about the Democratic staff have done a report I've just seen, and I haven't had a chance to go through it all, but I guess the question that this raises for me is, where was OPM, though? It seems to me that one of the things we focused on, an admirable goal, was the backlog problem. Do you want to remind us what the backlog was?
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I wasn't here at the time, and I don't remember the number per se.
Mr. McFarland, do you remember?
I assume you're speaking of the retirement backlog?
Well, and also just the backlog on security clearances. One of the goals of OPM was let's try to reduce the backlog.
Yes.
It was quite considerable.
I think it was.
And so maybe we focused so heavily on that metric, because somebody, the ranking member, put up the bonus chart for former executives of this organization that we had outsourced to, but they were getting bonuses because that was the metric they were being measured by, was it not?
Well,
Ms. Archuleta?
I'm sorry, sir. The metric was timeliness and quality.
But weren't we also pressing EAT into that backlog?
There was, I'm told there was about $500,000 in the backlog.
Right.
The result of which we were trying to reduce that backlog so that government could continue with employees that were seeking that clearance.
When we were, when Ronald Reagan was going to Iceland, he invoked a Russian expression, "Dovre no provre," trust but verify. It looks to me in this case that OPM fell down on the job of the verify piece. I mean, if you're going to be looking at, sort of rapid delivery of security clearances, where is the random auditing to make sure they are what they say they're supposed to be?
I would just mention, sir, that during the process is a multi-layered process, and all of those cases that were dumped went through another review. They didn't go directly from the contractor to the adjudicator, but there's a third and final review, or a second and final review was taken.
But for years, we weren't catching the fact that people were dumping.
The egregious behavior of USIS in hiding this is part of the justification for the civil suit that is being conducted right now.
But irrespective of a civil suit, how are we going to correct it moving forward? What are the measures you're putting in place to safeguard the fact that nobody can do that again?
Well,
at least not easily.
Once we learned that there in fact had been this behavior, we took immediate steps for strengthening our oversight. We now conduct oversight on and
Ms. Archuleta, my question though was, what was the oversight at the time? It seems like it was pretty thin.
I wasn't here at the time, sir, but I can comment going forward that I'm doing everything I can.
No, Ms. Archuleta, my question is about what went wrong. How are we going to correct it moving forward if we don't understand what went wrong? From the Federal Government's point of view, from OPM's point of view, or from our point of view about OPM. We're relying on OPM to manage this. It's not good enough to say I wasn't there, so I can't answer any of that.
No, I agree with you, sir, but I have to take a look at what I can learn from what happened, as you mentioned, and going forward, how I can prevent that from happening again.
Forgive me, Mr. Chairman, just pressing this one more time. Is it your view, Ms. Archuleta, and I know you're new in the job, that something went terribly wrong and that we do need to put corrective measures in based on what went wrong?
Absolutely, sir. I agree with you.
Okay. I thank you, and I thank the Chair.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall. No questions? Mr. Lakeford? The Chair now recognizes the gentlelady, Ms. Kelly.
Thank you.
Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. The most frequent question that has been asked about the Aaron Alexis incident is how this young man could have received a security clearance in 2008, given his 2004 gun-related arrest in Seattle. Mr. McFarland, I understand that your office reviewed the background investigation conducted on Alexis by USIS and found that a copy of the police report was not included in the investigation. Can you explain for us why the police report was not included in the investigation report?
Well, my assumption is that when they went, or the history of the Seattle Police Department to provide that type of information was that they would not get it. So OPM had, or the Federal Investigative Service had created what they refer to as a workaround, allowing the investigator to take other avenues of approach, such as data bank information. And that's the reason that they didn't come up with the information on the gun. But I also understand that the police department was hesitant to give any information out because of liability concerns if there wasn't already a conviction attached to it. And in this case, there was not a conviction at that point.
And Mr. Lewis, is it possible that if details of the 2004 gun-related arrest had been included in his background investigation report, he may not have received a secret-level clearance?
That sort of information could have led to the denial of his clearance.
Okay. Director Archuleta, is the Seattle Police Department one of a number of state and local jurisdictions that does not cooperate with investigative requests for criminal history information?
Seattle is now cooperating.
Oh, they're now cooperating?
They're now cooperating.
So how many?
Since 2011.
Since 2011. And how many are on that list? What was that number?
It was about 450.
And do you see any of the others changing like Seattle?
As I mentioned, the District of Columbia has recently come on board as a cooperating local law enforcement district.
So that's just one out of many.
We're working very closely with others to persuade them to participate.
Okay. How do we address situations like the Alexis case, where the workaround apparently did not capture some of the very critical information?
I think there's, I think there's two issues that you raise here. The first one is with the continuous evaluation, so that we're getting this information not once every 10 years, but we're continually provided information about anyone who holds a secret or top secret clearance. Secondly, I think it's the relationships that we have with the local law enforcement agencies, and that needs to be strengthened, and I look forward to working with this committee in support of that.
And panel members in general, there is existing Federal law that requires state and local law enforcement agencies to comply with requests for criminal history information, but there is no enforcement mechanism under that law. Ranking members Lynch and Cummings have introduced legislation that would strengthen compliance or at least disincentivize noncompliance. Do you agree that there is need for such legislation, any of you?
Yes, we absolutely concur with that.
We do as well.
Also agree.
We need to get the information. That's true.
I think the administration working with this committee would be very interested in reviewing such legislation.
And we would welcome anything that would increase the cooperation with local law enforcement.
Okay. I know we're here today talking about secret level clearance and how this person got it, and we didn't know his background, but I also feel, not to do with you guys, but that also speaks to the importance of background checks, period. So thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. We now go to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lankford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks, y'all, for being here for the long day. You've gone through a lot of questioning already on that. I have a couple questions just on insourcing once we get to the OPM process. There was obviously a lot of this was taken out of OPM and moved to private contractors, 70% of it back in the 90s. Now there is some thought about does it need to move back into it. I'd like to ask the Director what your thoughts are about that. Do you believe the Federal Security Clearance background investigations performed by OPM employees, do you think they should be performed solely or mostly, I would even say, by OPM employees, or you think the current model of outsourcing is a good model still?
As I mentioned earlier, sir, the enormity or the large numbers of clearances and background investigation, or the clearances requested and background investigations that are conducted by OPM is a very large number, and I don't think that right now there is the numbers within Federal employee, within FIS to conduct those. That's why we rely on contractors to assist us.
So should continue in your perspective, not what it is now, but that should continue.
I believe that with with a strong quality performance standards that we could rely on contractors to help us.
Okay. I have a question as well again. Before OPM sends the background investigation files out to the client agencies, there's a final quality review to ensure the file is complete. Is that correct? Am I tracking with that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
What percentage of those files are returned back to OPM by the client agencies because the file is incomplete?
About 1%.
Okay. Can you explain just that quality review process, how that works mechanically?
Yes. After a background investigation is completed, the contractor is required to perform a quality review. That quality review, or that once that quality review is completed and it is sent to OPM or FIS, and another quality review is conducted, it is sent then to the adjudicator, who then reviews all of the information, determines whether a clearance will be given.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lewis, can I ask you that same question? What percentage of cases do you estimate that that you get from OPM that are incomplete?
There are two layers to that. The cases that get rejected back to OPM are about a 1% rate. There are cases that come through that are missing information, but they are not missing information because OPM failed to carry out a complete investigation. There are instances where employers refuse to talk to the OPM investigator and give information. So it's greater than the 1%. But
give me a guess. Give me a guess on a percentage there.
The last number I heard was in the 30% range. But again, these are instances where the failure of a source to provide information was adequately documented, and we were able to continue with an adjudication.
So what do you do with that? How do you finish that out? Obviously, you've got an incomplete file. Can you give me an example of something that might be missing from that, and then what do you do with it?
Well, for example, at the top secret level, there's a requirement for neighborhood checks, and particularly in this area, people move, and there may not be anybody who knew the subject of the investigation who's available. So we have given guidance to the DOD Consolidated Adjudication Facility, which identifies the types of information which may not be available, and which would still allow the DOD CAF to do their adjudication.
But you're saying right now, once you get it over, you're able to still be able to navigate that?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Rose, can I ask you just a question about OPM investigations for a contract investigator if there's a misconduct issue? Sometimes that investigation occurs, and it's my understanding that sometimes you don't even know that a person is being investigated that you have contract responsibility for. Is that correct or not correct?
That is correct.
Then my understanding is that at some point you get a bill is when you find out this has occurred. They've done an investigation. You're being billed for the investigation. There's misconduct that has occurred with someone that is under your purview as well. I'd like to know just how you handle that, how you process that. As a contractor that's trying to oversee people, how would it improve your workflow to be able to be in the loop on that?
Yeah, thank you, sir, for that question. If there is and typically it will be identified by us, that there may be a falsification of data through the rigorous quality processes that we have in place within CACI, a series of recontacts, rechecks, re-record checks. So if that's suspected by contract terms, we report that to OPM immediately within 24 hours. OPM makes a decision what to do with that person. If, in fact, there's a further investigation that's required, essentially at that point, and you're correct, sir, that we basically get the bill for the amount of rework that's required, yet we don't have insight into that. And we have requested additional details to allow us to have insight into what the support data is on that. We'd welcome additional detail on that when we do get those bills.
Just the detail of what the cost is, you're saying? So not just being in the loop in it, but actually getting a detailed, here's what I'm paying for.
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Spear.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you to all of the witnesses for your participation today. Let me start off by asking Mr. McFarland if you'd like to clarify a statement you made earlier. Did OPM know about the fraud before the whistleblower filed their lawsuit?
Actually, the government was not aware of the extent of the fraud until the key TAM was filed in July of 2011. And then our office came into that information August of 2011.
So what's really clear to me in general is that we have a contractor that had 2 contracts that created a conflict of interest. They knew it created a conflict of interest. They used it to their advantage, and the penalty imposed upon them is to continue to have a contract with the U.S. government. Let me start with you, Director Archuleta. My understanding is that they circumvented OPM's oversight of their performance in quality review. This is a statement made during the audit. I'm not splitting hairs, but they knew how we were auditing. They knew what kind of reports we generated to oversee that they were actually performing the activities. So they circumvented our oversight process, and they falsified records to help do that. Why did OPM allow USIS to hold both contracts?
The first contract on the background investigations was split between both USIS, CACI, and Key Point, and there was only, and then the support contract was only bid by USIS. I might just mention as well that as soon as we found out about the egregious behavior, we took immediate action.
So USIS no longer has the support contract, is that correct?
I took action last week to federalize that.
All right.
The support
but why
contract.
would we initially have done it in the first place? It's just a fundamental conflict of interest. Whether it's acted upon or not, it creates an environment so that the kind of activity and the dumping of 40% of these reviews was able to take place for over 4 years. So why would we ever do that?
I don't disagree with you, and as I stated, I took action to change that.
So can we agree that you will never have a support contract being provided to an entity that also has a function?
I believe that the review of quality it has to be done by FIS, and I would agree with you on that.
By that you mean by the Federal Government or by a third party?
By the Federal Government, the Federal Investigative Services of OPM.
Has anyone done an analysis? I think Mr. Langford was pursuing a set of questions about continuing to privatize some of this function. He and I may disagree a little bit, but has anyone done an analysis to see how much we spent with private contractors that the market seems ready, willing, and able to invest in? Private equity is all over, USIS and others, versus doing it internally. I don't think we pay bonuses of $375,000. And this is bonuses the taxpayers of this country paid to these contractors. Let's be really clear about it. This isn't money coming out of their pockets. It's money coming out of the taxpayers. So have you done an analysis to see whether or not it's actually cost-effective to continue to privatize some of the reviews?
There is not, to my knowledge, there hasn't been such an analysis.
So why wouldn't we do that?
I would certainly like to discuss that with you further.
Mr. Chairman, I think before we continue to privatize the function, which I think if we ask the American people, do you think that private contractors should be determining whether or not top-secret clearances are given to various contractors and various Federal employees? They would probably be alarmed to know that we privatize that function. But more importantly, at the very least, we should determine whether or not it's cost-effective.
I agree with the gentlelady who yield. I agree with the gentlelady that we should do a thorough review of the history that began, quite frankly, in the Clinton administration when this was originally outsourced. And I would look forward to working with the lady both on the effectiveness and the cost. USIS, as you know, was spun off effectively from an in-house service, and the idea that we should periodically look at a program. I also share with the gentlelady that although I do not object to a potential contractor doing the review, there needs to be real separation between those doing something and those auditing something. And the same should be true, as you know, in my opinion, when government entities audit themselves. We need to have a level of independence of those auditors.
So, and I guess, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regaining my time, I'm also concerned that we are wimps in the Federal Government, that even when we are taken to the cleaners by contractors, we go back for more, and that there aren't any penalties that are imposed of any significance. So my question to you, Director, is, has USIS or Expert been penalized at all?
The civil case against USIS is requesting treble damages, up to treble damages.
Are there no administrative actions you can take, fines that you can impose?
We have withheld all of the bonuses since 2010, and as we move forward with this case, we'll be working closely with DOJ.
The gentlelady's time has expired. I thank the gentlelady. We now go to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield my time to you, if I may.
I am deeply pleased to accept that. Following up on a couple of questions for the Director, one question is, can you fire a Federal employee at will any time if they did similar failures to perform to what Mr. Phillips's employees did?
The merit system protects Federal employees, and there's a process that where there is
to shortcut it for this committee that's familiar with it, but Mr. Phillips's 20 people have been fired. They could be fired or forced to resign at a moment's notice. Isn't it true that every one of his employees, each of these contractors' employees, you could individually disqualify without any lengthy administrative process, thus that if you see wrongdoing by any of these contractors' individual employees, you can terminate their ability to work on these contracts?
Each of the contractors that were accused of this egregious behavior were immediately suspended from the contract.
Well, I think that's an important thing for Ms. Speer, is that the flexibility of your quickly taking somebody out who even slightly loses your confidence is something you have within the contractor industry, where, quite frankly, people would be on administrative leave with pay for a long period of time at best, and you'd be denied their services but still paying. Isn't that true?
The merit system protects Federal employees, as you know, sir.
Okay. I'll take that as a yes. Mr. McFarland, I want to make sure the record's clear, and I think it isn't clear. Ms. Speer asked you a question about the investigation in which your answer implied to me that Mr. Blake Percival brought the case before you understood the magnitude. Is that correct?
Yes, before we understood the magnitude.
I'd like to bring your attention to an April 4, 2011 document, and I'd ask unanimous consent to be placed in the record. It is to the USIS VP Field Operations, Mr. Robert, and slightly scratched out, Calmia. And It bears Stephen Anderson's signature, the branch manager, Federal Investigation Oversight Branch. Are you familiar with that letter?
No, I'm not.
Well, we'll have a copy given to you. In a nutshell, on April 4th, 2011, the United States Office of Personnel Management lays out a serious complaint, not necessarily all the 650,000 or 4 years, a serious complaint, and you're talking about thousands of these dumpings. And the reason that I'm so concerned that the government is getting a bad rap on this key tab case is one of the CCs is Mr. Blake Percival. So he is CC'd about a major investigation, a deep area of concern that OPM has discovered on April 4th. 3 months later, he files a $1 billion lawsuit. I'll give you a copy of that, and I'd like to follow up after you've had a chance to look at it. But from what I can tell, OPM notified the complainant of their deep concern and an open investigation. He seized on the magnitude of it ahead of time, but not on the basic discovery. Since Abraham Lincoln, key TAM cases were intended to discover that which otherwise would not be discovered, not simply to amplify, prosecute, and benefit financially by it. It's a deep area of concern. I've got to tell you, if Mr. Phillips's company owes us $1 billion, I want the $1 billion. But quite frankly, I don't want to share it with somebody who was CC'd on a letter 3 months before they filed the case. At least on the surface, this kind of thing should be a deep concern to all of us. And with that, I have only probably one other question. Mr. Rhodes, there's been a lot of questions. Mr. Phillips's company is in the spotlight, but isn't it true that, in fact, the level of flexibility and cost and the ability to up and also for Mr. Ordowski, your companies can scale up to meet demand quicker than the Federal workforce. Isn't that true?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And if tomorrow we were to have a reduction in the level of need, you would also lay people off immediately. Isn't that true?
Yes, sir, we have.
During the shutdown, the so-called shutdown of the government, were your people paid?
Sir, we typically have a backlog of cases that range about 2 months. So we were pressing down on that and coming close to actually having no backlog.
So you continued to work without an assurance of being paid, is that correct?
Yes, sir, to meet the mission.
And you only got paid for work done had we not authorized it when we opened back up, you wouldn't have been paid?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. Did either of your companies any of the 3 companies lay anyone off?
We were close at that time. We were working down our backlog, but I do not believe specifically because of the shutdown we laid anyone off.
Okay. So I just want to make it clear, if you had furloughed anybody, they wouldn't have been paid even when we turned back on because they wouldn't have accomplished work. You're only paid for work you do, not for days in which people are employees but laid off.
Yes, sir.
True of all your companies?
Yes.
Okay. I want to make that clear because it's very, very clear that Federal workers are not an easily raised or lower level. And I share with the Director the desire to make sure that the stable force, the long-term force of people auditing and reviewing are inherently governmental. I want to be a little careful not to rush to bring everything in-house when, in fact, we're not very good in the Federal Government at increasing or reducing workloads the way many of your companies can be asked to do. For the Director, is that pretty consistent with your view of best case for OPM? You mentioned earlier that you were not in a position to take on all the workforce if you were to eliminate these contractors.
I think there's a critical balance between the work that the Federal employee can perform as well as in partnership with private contractors.
I thank the gentlelady. We now go to the gentlelady from New York.
Thank you. There are allegations of fraud. This is serious allegations. I'm wondering, are we looking at a case of too big to suspend? You've suspended workers, but you haven't suspended the company. And I understand that grounds to suspend is that the contracting officer could suspend the contract due to fraud. And by all indications, it appears that fraud is there. Would anyone like to answer that? Mrs. Archuleta.
The USIS has taken the steps to remove all those individuals who
I said that. They removed people.
They removed them, and we...
But it was the company and the atmosphere in the company that allowed this to happen. May I just read one internal email from April 2010? It stated, quote, "Shelves are as clean as they could get. Flushed everything out like a dead goldfish," end quote. Were you aware of this email?
No.
Was anyone aware of this email?
I was aware of it.
You were aware of it. And seeing that evidence today, do you believe that USIS was honest with OPM, Mr. McFarland?
No, I don't believe they were honest at all.
Do you think they were honest with Mrs. Archuleta?
USIS at that time was not honest and had worked and engaged in fraud.
So why in the world are we continuing this contract with this company? Is it too big to suspend? Who could suspend this? The contracting officer, Mr. McFarland?
Yes, the contracting officer could do that.
Is the contracting officer on the panel?
No.
Well, is there a concrete standard that we have that would point out when something could be suspended?
The procurement officer and the design of the contracts holds the contractor accountable, and that is why we were able to remove the individuals who conducted this egregious behavior, and why we've been able to take immediate steps to strengthen the
Well, I would say the contracting law, as I remember it, says contracts can go to responsible bidders. Does anyone think that ISIS has been a responsible bidder in this? ISIS? Does anyone think they've been a responsible bidder in any way, shape, or form?
May I respond to that?
Sounds like they were defrauding the government. I just have another question. I want to make sure I get my questions in before yielding to you, Mr. Phillips. But there is a system, actually I wrote the law, called Vindex, where you have to check the performance of contractors before you award a contract. And in that is whether or not they meet the contract criteria, whether or not they get the contracts done on time, whether they have cost overruns repeatedly, if they have a track record. I wrote this after a $25 million contract was given to a company that didn't exist when I was on the City Council in New York. I'm not kidding. So it just basically looks at the performance, and at the very least, Mr. Chairman, we should have part of the Vindex file whether or not they defrauded the government. I would say that this is a grounds of not being a responsible contractor. Now, I understand that this is a big company. You spun off from the government. So my basic question is, do you think that they are too big to be suspended, Mr. McFarland?
No, I don't think that they're too big to be suspended. I think they could be suspended and others would take over. But there would be an interim of a problem area for sure. But I don't know that would be enough to suggest that they shouldn't be suspended.
Well, they created a national security threat.
Yes, I agree.
Absolutely, created a national. I would call that very serious.
It is very
extremely serious. And I think at the very least this performance should be tagged on their Vindex review, and that anybody who gives them a contract has to expressly say why in the world are they giving it to someone who defrauded the government and created a national security threat to our country. And anyone else like to comment on this? Okay, Mr. Phillips.
Thank you. When these allegations, and by the way, they are just allegations at this point. We've not had our day in court. When these allegations first came to the company's attention in January of 2012, the company moved aggressively to cooperate with the investigation, which was initially led by the OPMIG, subsequently joined by DOJ. Any employees who were found to have any responsibility related to those allegations were quickly separated from the company. Over the past 2 years, the company has taken aggressive and effective action to increase controls, enhance procedures, place new leadership in place, and today USIS is a strong, responsible contractor providing a cost-effective and high-quality service for OPM. And that's after 2 years of hard work, including separating of anybody who had any responsibility for the behavior alleged in the complaint.
I think, I just want to make sure before I go to Ms. Grisham, the Director, you said something, I think you want to correct the record. You said they committed fraud. You want to correct that to an allegation?
Yes, I actually did say afterwards, but I didn't say it loud enough, an allegation of fraud.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Gentlelady from New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Archuleta, welcome. Point of personal privilege, Director Archuleta is from my district, sort of, definitely from my home state.
She very proudly told me that in our one-on-one meeting. So she does not make it a secret one bit that she's in a much colder and less hospitable climate here.
Sometimes. In any event, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that, and congratulations on your job. And by virtue of the content and the discussion in this hearing, it's an important role with many, many challenges that, if not go unaddressed, we continue to have these significant and serious threats and issues to our security. And so I appreciate very much your high-level attention and your willingness to tackle the issues that have been presented today and others. And I wanted to take a different tact, and I don't want that anyone to assume that I don't agree with many of the statements by my colleagues on both sides of the aisle about focusing in on improving our practices and minimizing all of our security breaches and threats, and getting our criminal background checks and related issues on track, and safeguarding that information, and making sure that we have actors on behalf of the Federal Government that are able to do that job, and that we feel safeguarded by virtue of having that information vetted and dealt with appropriately. But in the context of then mental health, there is an interesting and I think a very difficult balance, and I want to talk about it for a minute, and that is that we want folks to disclose. We want folks to disclose prior to a criminal background screen, and we want them to disclose after. Some emotional illnesses or emotional problems aren't a specific diagnosis and have something to do with what happens in your environment in your life later after a security clearance. And I would guess that most people aren't going to disclose that because you lose your security clearance for reasons that I think are going to be easy to talk about. But if people get the right kind of help, they may not be a security threat and might get the kind of help that they need. So it's a very delicate balance. We don't want to create any more problems where people fall through the cracks and we create these problems and security threats and loss of life. They're absolutely unacceptable. But I'm interested in where we draw some of these balances and how we can do a much better job screening and getting folks to want to participate in that screening. Are you wrestling with these issues currently?
Yes, these very serious issues are being discussed right now, and I appreciate your comments and would seek to have further discussions with you. The issues of balancing privacy and national security are very difficult, but the issues of mental health are also and play an important role in our background investigations and the granting of security clearances. So I would appreciate the opportunity to have further discussions with you as these ongoing issues are being reviewed by both OPM and OD&I through the Quality Assessment Working Group.
Thank you. And maybe in that Quality Assessment Working Group, how do we today, notwithstanding that I hope that these processes get greatly improved, how do you ensure that employees who reach out now about mental health or mental health related issues, that they're actually getting the assistance that they need? And it's really a two-part issue, because one, you want to make sure that you are responding correctly and balancing those privacy issues. But then if there is a treatment course, you want to make sure that that employee is to the highest degree possible, notwithstanding their own legal protections, that they're adhering to those, because if not, then you haven't minimized potentially any of those threats internally or externally that you're required to eliminate or mitigate to the highest degree.
Certainly the support of OPM for any employee around mental health issues is there, and offering not only whatever support we can as employers, but also helping to refer those individuals to doctors or other practitioners who could help.
And I'm assuming also that with your agency's involvement, that the Inspector General, that all related players would be weighing in on trying to strike that very delicate balance.
I know they already are, and I appreciate your support for this issue and would look forward to further discussions with you.
Thank you. And I am out of time, so I do hope that, Mr. Chairman, that we can continue to have these kinds of discussions, because the best possible practice isn't going to get at all of these issues. And even in law enforcement, I know that I'm taking up time I don't have, so I appreciate your patience with me. They have a screening tool that's prepared by mental health professionals, and it depends on the jurisdiction about how effective those tools are at screening people in or out appropriately or inappropriately. And I don't think it's an area that we've been all that effective at. And given what's tragically occurred, we have to do something about it immediately.
Well, for the gentlelady, one advantage of going last is you're unlikely to see a heavy, quick gavel on your time. But I join with the gentlelady in recognizing that mental health after somebody's an employee is critical. Part of what we're concerned about here today, of course, is Aaron Alexis was somebody whose mental health should have made them not an employee, as it turns out. But I share with you that sort of screening desire and then treatment as appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And the gentlelady from the District of Columbia has one final question.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I just want to clear up what seems to be a circular process here, but I do want to say I think this may be the first hearing, I may be wrong, in the House on the Navy Yard shooting, and I want to thank you very much for this hearing. And I'm certain I speak not only for my own district. There were people from all, they've had to rename the building. This was such a tragic occurrence. But I was puzzled, really, that the President, apparently OPM barred the President of USIS Investigative Division from working on contracts. So you can understand, OPM is doing that, though. But then USIS protests, essentially implicating OPM in the fact that the man was promoted in the first place. I have no idea whether or not perhaps Ms. Archuleta, OPM reconsidered its decision. All we know is that the committee was informed that this man has resigned. Perhaps I should go to Mr. McFarland. Do you think he should have been suspended? Should OPM have been implicated in his in his promotion, as apparently USIS says, and we're shocked that the implication was so deep that OPM would then bar him from working on the contract?
I'm not familiar with that aspect of it that you're talking about right now.
Ms. Archuleta, you know that this man's resigned now. Was OPM involved, as USIS says, in promoting him to President?
No, we weren't. I think you may be talking about the process of uncovering who was involved in the fraud and the alleged fraud, on the alleged fraud, and the individuals were removed over a sequence of time. And as we learned of,
now, all I'm trying to find out is, do you have any say on who gets promoted or not promoted?
No.
So you didn't have anything to do with that. And with the resignation, how did that? How did that resignation come about? Now he's gone. Now, you tried to make him gone. Now he's gone. Did you request his resignation?
We suspended him from the contract. What he did afterwards was up to the company itself.
Yeah, I just want to suggest that this may, if you have such a close relationship, Mr. McFarland, maybe this is inherently a governmental matter. It looks like they're in bed virtually with USIS. and if they're in bed with them, it may be because it involves secure matters, and that they can't really separate themselves from the company. So one wonders whether this is appropriately given to a contractor.
Are you saying that the suggestion is that that person was in bed with OPM hierarchy?
I'm suggesting that the company may be in bed with OPM because it works so closely, and apparently has to work so closely because it's inherently governmental work, because it involves secure matters, and despite the mistakes that have been made here, it looks like you'll be working even more closely with the company. One wonders whether there's a distinction between the government and the company sometime. Thank you, Mr.
I thank the gentlelady. We now will go to the ranking member for his closing.
Mr. Chairman, I again want to thank you for this hearing. When to the panel, first of all, I want to thank you too. And just a few years ago, I chaired a subcommittee in the Transportation Committee, and that committee was called Maritime and Coast Guard Matters, Coast Guard and Maritime Matters. And we had a situation there where literally the government was purchasing boats that didn't float, literally. You know, when I listen to the testimony here and I hear things like 665,000 dumped files, Mr. McFarland, it's shocking to the conscience. It really is. You know, sometimes I think that when people do these things, they need to understand that there are consequences. They may not live long enough to see the consequences. They may not ever hear about them. They may not ever be brought to justice, but there are consequences. And when we, as entities and individuals, create in doing our individual jobs that we're supposed to do, move to a culture of mediocrity or negligence or pure fraud and greed, it causes all kinds of problems. And we have to put in, unfortunately, we have to put in the mechanisms to protect ourselves from ourselves. And I'm hoping that there are a lot of lessons learned here. We cannot bring back those individuals who were killed. But hopefully we can put things in place. And I know we're continuing to do it, Ms. Archuleta and others. I know we're trying to do that, but we need to got to make sure it happens fast. And nobody, and I know the Chairman would agree with me, nobody's trying to put a negative light on all the folks who work for these various companies and whatever. No. You know, it only takes a few, but the few can do mighty damage. Mr. Phillips, as I said to you a little bit earlier, you've got a tough job. You really do. And maybe it's been made easier by a lot of people taking the exit ramp and getting out of the company for one reason or another. But surely many of them will be brought to justice. And as I sat here, I could not think it. The Chairman and I, we were just talking about our various districts. And I think about the people in my block. I live not too far from the Ravens Stadium in Baltimore. And I've said this many times, if somebody in my block, and there are people there, who, if they stole a bike, they get a record for a lifetime. If they steal a bike, $150 bike, record, lifetime, where they won't be able to get jobs, won't be able to live in certain places, won't be able to get certain education opportunities like scholarships and whatever. And then when I look at stuff like this, where people are not doing their jobs, and you know, I'm sure the investigation will reveal what it will reveal, but I'm sure there's some criminal activity here. You know, I want to make sure that we get to that, and I'm sure the Justice Department will. because I think not only must we do it to make sure that these incidents don't happen again, but one of the things that the Chairman talks about in his statement when he gives the purpose of the committee, he talks about trust in government and making sure that the tax dollars are spent properly and making sure that people feel good, feel that we are making sure that their dollars are spent, their tax dollars are spent effectively and efficiently. And so this is a bipartisan effort because this is about making sure that those people who are given clearances deserve them. And after all, they don't, I mean, we don't come up with this concept of clearances just to be doing it. I mean, there's a purpose for this. And so, again, I want to thank all of you for what you have contributed. And I know I went a little longer than I expected to, Mr. Chairman, but I think this is just so very, very important because there are consequences. Thank you very much.
I thank the gentleman. In closing, a couple of things. First of all, Mr. Phillips, Mr. Rhodes, and Mr. Odorowski, we're going to be looking at your companies on an ongoing basis. This committee has the primary jurisdiction for the Federal workforce and their contractors, and it is an area of interest that we're going to do on an ongoing basis. We certainly want to make sure that what Mr. Phillips says has been straightened out at his organization has been. We also are going to want to make sure that best practices continue to evolve at both of yours. I'm of the opinion that government does best what it checks somebody else doing and does worse what it does in-house and then tries to hold itself accountable. That's been a problem of government for a long time, is are we an honest broker of what works and what doesn't? Director, you're the honest broker. And it's extremely important that, in fact, first we see if the systems that failed us, including the software that wasn't in place for many years that ultimately discovered that case files were being opened and quickly closed, now dubbed dumping, that kind of work, that kind of IT forward-leaning, something that the Ranking Member and I have been working on trying to modernize Federal IT procurement so that you can have those systems. We need to work with you to make sure you have it, those management tools, because we think it's important. I think here on both sides of the aisle today, we became very aware that there are two problems we're dealing with. One has to do with how security clearances occur and for which there are some legal changes that this committee is going to have to work on. But, Director, there's something that I'm more concerned about, and that is that it is a policy not to look at the Internet as an investigative tool. This is an area within your jurisdiction that I strongly encourage you make your best effort, recognizing that there are some questions of whether you'll be sued for doing it and so on, that both in the case of security clearances, you free up your in-house people and these contractors to at least begin looking at this tool for what could be important information that would then lead to further investigation that would not necessarily be on the Internet. And secondly, that you ask the question from a standpoint of the entire Federal workforce, is it wise in this day and age not to at least look at the Internet before each and every person is hired? That there's some sort of a performa that is done objectively not occur, because I think that it is important that we say we've done due diligence on every person that comes to work for the Federal Government so that if they have an anger management problem, like shooting tires out, that we don't wait and ask, did they get a clearance wrong, but we ask, should this individual, Aaron Alexis, ever been hired to work for any Federal work organization or a contractor? And we could have gotten into Snowden and had a similar discussion about that. Lastly, Mr. Lynch dropped a bill the other day. The committee has been working on a completely bipartisan basis. Most of what's in his bill and some other items are items that we have brought to the attention both of OPM and Department of Defense, and we've gotten unofficial answers and some comments. At this point, based on your discussion today, we would ask that you work with committee staff, both majority and minority, on all aspects to give us, if you will, final answers on the proposals we're making so that we can drop a comprehensive bipartisan bill. The majority did not offer a bill, figuring that it was much better to have this hearing and then get your final comments, but I think it's now appropriate to do so. Lastly, I meant it deadly seriously. I believe in key TAM. I believe that whistleblowers bringing us new information that where the government is being wronged is critical. I also believe that whenever possible, the Federal Government should find its own problems, correct them, and any amount owed to the Federal Government flows to us without an outside piece of litigation. For that reason, I am deeply concerned that the evidence in the case of this particular lawsuit appears on its face to be an individual filing a case months after he was CC'd on what I would have considered to be the smoking gun. And I would ask that you be aware of that. We will be making an additional referral to Judiciary Committee and to Department of Justice, asking them to at least give us a legal evaluation of whether or not this key TAM may in fact be inappropriate, not the suit, but the key TAM.